A very warm welcome to the viewers of this program. I am Dr. Gurmeet Kaur from School of Law, Indira Gandhi National Open University. Today we would be discussing what is the impact of human rights on the property laws with special reference to right to home. Today with me Professor Sara. She is working as a professor in law in the University of Southampton. She has also worked in a Hong Kong university for about 10 to 12 years and your main area is company law, property law, and have done research work in the area of impact of human rights, especially to the property rights with reference to the European Convention on Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms. So today we would like our listeners or our viewers to know much about the human rights, what is human rights, how it impacts the property rights, how the property rights, especially right to home, should be enforced. So, how do you conceptualize this human right, especially in reference to the property law or right to home? What's your view pertaining to that?
Well, thank you, Dr. Kaur, for this wonderful opportunity to be able to speak with you today. I have to say that as a initially private lawyer, I initially thought that perhaps human rights didn't really have much to do with the work that I carry out as a property lawyer and also as a corporate lawyer. But I think I've become increasingly aware that actually human rights is important to us all in many, many areas of our life, and in particular where we live, our home, like our health, our education, even our position perhaps within our community is reflected in the type of home in which we live.
But not much emphasis has been given on, right to property and right to home, which it has to be, because it's a basic right, as you have rightly said. So, I think learners should know that what is the right to home and how, what could be an enforcement mechanism internationally and at national level, that they should be educated about their right to home. So, when we talk about human rights, it's guaranteed by law. If we look into the international scenario, maybe it is guaranteed through treaties, or there are many international conventions and covenants over that, and whereby the states or a nation states, they have given the positive, obligation. They are under positive obligation that they have to follow those norms and they have to protect the human rights of each and every individual in their nation states. So, how you contextualize it in the, we can say in a global scenario or an international scenario? How you contextualize human rights, especially with reference to the property and home? How you contextualize?
I think you make some very important points there, that we have, each state has international obligations to report to the various supervising authorities on their compliance with human rights. But I think that obviously only goes so far for the individual home occupier. From my perspective, what I have observed living in England, in the United Kingdom, is that the mechanism we have through the European Convention on Human Rights has provided a judicial route in which human rights, and in particular of my interest, the right to respect for the home, is capable of direct enforcement by an individual. Now this can happen through two routes. One is that under the convention, each state, including the United Kingdom, may be brought before the European Court on Human Rights for a breach of, for instance, the right to respect for the home and shelter. But in addition now, in the United Kingdom, the government has enacted the Human Rights Act in 1998, which brings those convention principles directly into our domestic law. So an individual can either bring a right of action against a public authority directly in our domestic courts, or they can raise an issue about the human rights compliance of legislation where for instance, they might be evicted by an individual, or possibly evicted by an individual landlord. So I suppose that to give that a sort of a gloss in your jurisdiction, I guess our human rights is our constitutional right, and therefore they can be directly implemented into domestic law. So
do you think the judiciary has played a role in implementing this right to home?
I wish I could say yes. But I think that the truth is, at the moment, that the judiciary in the United Kingdom has been a little bit reluctant to recognise the right to respect for the home under Article 8 of the European Convention. And in fact, there has been a series of judicial decisions in the European Court which has held the United Kingdom in breach. And it has taken a little bit of persuasion.
Yeah, because when we say human rights, or we talk about right to home or a right to shelter, so it's a part of right to live with dignity,
Yes.
So it's such a basic right which every human being should have.
Yes.
Generally, when we look into the constitutions of worldwide, maybe India, maybe UK, everywhere it says a person has right to life. It's everywhere.
Yes.
So why this right to home is not, it's given in a very strong manner? Why it has not been accepted in a strong manner that everybody has right to, home, and they should be provided, the state should be responsible for providing the same. I think they need to understand that they have right to their right to home, and it's a basic human right, and they should know that they have to enforce this right also.
Yes. And I think that part of the problem has been that the law has tended to associate home as being dependent on property rights, that you need to own your home.
Yes.
And I think one of the big breakthroughs that the European Court of Human Rights has emphasised is that a home is not dependent upon the ownership of property rights. It is, a home is is not a legal concept. It is a factual concept. It is about somewhere where you can shelter from the elements. That is secure, a place of privacy, a place where you can express yourself. So it is these, what they call sufficient and continuing links with the place in which you sleep and live.
Home plays a very important role in a personality development of a person, because a person needs a place where he or she can relax. You know, so they need that place. So it should not be only dependent upon like ownership only, that you have to own it.
And I think for me, it has been that recognition which has emphasised how important it is that we protect home, not just on the basis of property rights, but also look to a person's individual connection with that home. I mean, for instance, I think I'm aware that there is so much research, both in my jurisdiction and elsewhere around the world, about how important having a secure home is, for instance, for a child's development.
There are certain laws, like women are basically, generally, they are considered vulnerable group sometimes. So when the right to home comes, especially when they got married, after marriage, so generally now this concept has emerged in India that they have right to home. The matrimonial home is their home, even though they are not any property rights.
Exactly. You have,
but they have right to home.
That's a very, very good illustration. I'm sure that every woman would say she has a home, even though she does not necessarily have a property right.
This has to be, more, it should be in more stringent manner, it should be enforced by the government or public authorities, not only for the women's, for each and every individual, I feel.
Yes, and that is the big development, I think, or change even, that a consideration of human rights, whether it be expressed through a right to respect for the home or a right to shelter, that raises that possibility It raises the possibility that those people who have a home, women, children,
those in the need of,
even
those who are in
dwellers,
need, yeah, slum dwellers also.
Also,
yes,
that their respect for their home should be recognized.
But I think enforcement mechanism, that is little bit lacking everywhere.
Yes.
So that has to be worked out.
Yes. It is recognized that the most extreme interference is to be evicted from your home.
Yes.
There may, of course, be some lesser measure of interference, which might be, for instance, some environmental interference. So there is some pollution or excessive noise, or what we in legal terms would call a nuisance.
Nuisance, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That might also be an interference.
Yes, yes.
But I guess I am particularly interested in the idea of repossession or eviction as an interference. Because, of course, as I've said, that's the most extreme form. Once you have somebody is evicted, if you're looking at it in human rights terms, then it's about testing whether the law upon which that eviction is based achieves, well, in the legal term is proportionality, but I think it's easier to think of a fair balance between the law and the human right to respect for the home.
There is a need to achieve that fair balance, actually.
Yes.
And especially when it comes to, when eviction by the public authorities.
Yes.
Individually, when there is a, I think, private dispute. So there are certain, I think, grounds on which a person could be evicted.
Yes.
But when it comes to the public authorities, so generally there, I think there is more violation of human rights, of right to shelter or a home of the individual.
And indeed, in the human rights jurisprudence in Europe, states or public authorities are particularly subject to this need to respect for the home. So, for instance, if we're looking at that fair balance, I mean, I'm not saying for a moment that if the landowner, for instance, has a property right, that is very important too.
Yeah, that is very important to landowner.
It's very important in that fair balance. But I guess I'm saying it's not the only thing.
Yes.
And particularly when you're dealing with a public authority.
Yes.
In the UK, for instance, it's recognised that when a public authority wishes to evict a home occupier, it's not sufficient that they just depend upon their property right. They also have to demonstrate that they are exercising that right, that property right, in pursuance of a public duty. For instance, to provide housing for everybody.
Yeah, because it's a state duty. It should be a state duty, a mandatory duty that they have to provide right to home to each and every person, every citizen, I should say.
Yes.
So that has to be, more put in a more stringent manner, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so perhaps if I could just continue to explain a little bit. So we need this fair balance.
Yes.
And it's a fair balance not just between legal rights, okay, the right of the landowner and, for instance, the right of the tenant occupier.
Yes.
Perhaps somebody owns a home as a tenant, or indeed if they have some ownership of it, it may be that some creditor wishes to evict them in order to recover a debt. So it's not just the balance between those legal rights, which might be defined by legislation, for instance, that we have to consider, but also we have to look at the individual circumstances of the occupier. So perhaps in exceptional circumstances, those individual circumstances might shift the balance away from the balance that has been achieved by the legal rights. So we're recognising the occupier not just as a legal person, but as a human person with a right to respect for their home. So perhaps to give an example, if the occupier is very elderly or is perhaps very ill, it might be necessary to achieve a fair balance to allow more time to be and perhaps particularly if it is a public authority, maybe they should have as part of their positive duties to which you referred, some help to find another home for that
there needs
vulnerable,
to be a balance between
that vulnerable individual. So where there is vulnerability, there is the balance may shift. Another important aspect to this is who is deciding whether there is a fair balance or not. And so
I think judiciary can play that role.
Exactly. It has to be somebody who is independent.
Because it's like a check of powers, you know. So when the legislation or when a state is having certain powers, there should be some check over that. So a judiciary can play a very important role here.
Very important role. And so again, under the Article 8 case law, it is recognized that this fair balance must be assessed by an independent tribunal, a court. But it is also important that that court has the ability, the jurisdiction, to be able to consider the fair balance. So they must have discretion. They must have discretion. So, for instance, if the law specifies that what I would call a mandatory ground to possession, so that which would deprive the court of any discretion, that is incompatible.
But here the problem somewhere lies, you know, because it's generally it's also a very debatable issue, because it's judiciary is not considered. It's interpret law. The law which is framed by the legislation. So in law making, when you say judiciary has a limited role to play, though now in in the era of judicial activism and all, the judiciary is also trying to play that role. But in fact, they cannot make law. You know, they can only interpret that which is existing. So if the property right is in the favor of a public authority, or it's like a discriminating with the other persons or an individual, so judiciary, there they got, little bit, they can't use much power there.
I mean, our experience is the same.
There is a need to sensitize the government that they have to take into consideration the human rights aspects.
Because I think that it is also, the government seem more prepared to recognize rights to education, to health, and those more abstract perhaps rights. But when we see the evidence which suggests that indeed the right to education or the right to health is actually dependent upon having a home.
Thanks, Saraji. We had, I think, a very wonderful discussion we had over the impact of human rights on a property related issues, because, right to home, as rightly said by the Professor Sara, is a very important and a basic right which every individual, every citizen should get, because it has an impact on overall personality development. Similarly, the property rights are also very important, but there is a need to strike a balance between the property rights and the rights of the basic rights of the individual, right to home and shelter, a basic fundamental rights. So it's, I think we had a very wonderful discussion. So thank you very much, Saraji.
Thank you very much, and I very much appreciate the opportunity, the valuable opportunity that you have given me today.
Thank you.